Good evening, everyone. I'm Johannes Haile Selassie, and I'm the director of the Institute of Human Origins here at the Arizona State University. And welcome, and thank you all for coming tonight for a wonderful event that we have, which is the third annual Bill Kimbel Distinguished Lecture, which is one of the major programs of the Institute of Human Origins. As you know, IHO was founded in 1981 by Lucy's discoverer, Don Johansen, who is here with us tonight. And since it's moved to ASU in 1997, it has become one of the preeminent institutions on human origins research, dealing with questions like, where did we come from? And where are we going? So basically, we have become one of the best institutes with 17 faculty and a lot of graduate students that are being trained in the institute. And this is kind of an evening where we have like wonderful lectures by prominent scientists. But I just want to say a little bit about this lecture series. Okay, so this evening's lecture is in honor of someone who was one of our internationally noted scientists, a researcher, a mentor, a professor who passed away about 3 years ago. That is Professor William H. Kimbel. We all call him Bill. Bill has served as director of IHO for many years, and his leadership of the Institute, his decades of fieldwork in Ethiopia, and the number of graduate students that he has trained is what brought IHO to become one of the best institutions. So he has a lot of contributions. He's made a lot of contributions to IHO. And this is our way of honoring him, one of the two ways that we honor him as member of our community. So IHO would actually not be here in this state-of-the-art building if it were not for Bill's efforts for many years. And we're really thankful for that. And Bill will always be remembered for what he's done for IHO, not only in terms of where we are today, but also how we've become recognized as one of the preeminent institutes on human origins research. So Bill was really influential in our field, and beyond his passing was a big loss for IHO and the general scientific community, a paleoanthropological community in general. But his legacy of excellence continues, right, in research, student training, and science education. And that's the kind of legacy that we're trying to continue here at IHO. As part of our efforts to maintain that legacy, we've started two programs. One of them is this Distinguished Lecture Series, which we called the Bill Kimbel Distinguished Lecture Series. And the other one is the Bill Kimbel Impact Fund. So the lecture series brings prominent scientists like our speaker tonight and tell us about paleoanthropology, tell us about all the scientific research that Bill has been doing his entire life. And they're taking it to another level following his legacy. The second one is, to honor him, we have started the Bill Kimbel Impact Fund. And that fund is to support graduate students so that they can go to colleges like ours and pursue all the vision that Bill had in terms of training graduate students, right? And we also think about public outreach and scientific programs. That was also part of what Bill used to do. And we need to continue that legacy. And this is where we really need everybody's support to make sure that his legacy continues by supporting this fund that we have started. So basically, there will be like cards out there that you can use, or you can also go to our website, or you can talk to me or any of our staff members if you want to learn more about this program. So I want to take this opportunity also to thank all of our board of directors and research council members, and also Arizona State University for all the support, for the continued support that we get. Because without that support, we wouldn't be here. We wouldn't be the most prominent, the preeminent institution on human origins research. I want to also thank all of our research scientists, IHO research scientists, without whose research we won't be preeminent. And I want to also thank all of our staff members who do most of the work in public outreach, scientific programs, and all of the stuff that makes us really a great institution. So we have among us today some of Bill's family, Aaron, Kimbel, his son. And we also have Bill's brother, Andy, and his wife, Sue. Thank you for coming. And before I call on Denise to introduce our speaker tonight, I want to ask Aaron if he has some things to say. Thank you so much.
We were just talking about the abilities of Kimbel's to project in large rooms, so I'm going to modulate my speaking voice for this microphone. Again, just thank you guys so much for coming. I know this would mean a lot to Dad, and I'm really grateful for Terry, who I actually don't know, but I'm really excited for the lecture, and I'm glad to meet you. And just so pleased that this has been able to continue in the way that it has, that the fund has been set up and is being contributed to in the way that it is. Because as you guys know better than me, I think his passion above almost anything else in this field was helping and subsequent generations of scholars and scientists. And I also know that he really loved to nitpick other people's work. So I think if he's watching from somewhere, he's probably enjoying watching a bunch of other people's lectures. Again, just thanks so much. And on behalf of Andy and Sue and my mom, who's screwing around in Florence right now somewhere, we're just, again, really grateful. So thank you.
Is this on? Yes. All right. It's so wonderful to see such a great crowd here tonight. Thank you all for being here. So don't panic, Terry. I am not going to tell any Terry Harrison stories. Okay. But I do want to say it is a particular pleasure for me personally to introduce our speaker tonight because he has been a great mentor, collaborator, and friend to me ever since I stepped into his lab as his graduate student almost 30 years ago. If you can believe that, Terry. So Professor Terry Harrison joined New York University in 1984 after receiving his PhD from University of London, is now Professor Emeritus at NYU. He was director of the ESC Plateau Paleontological Project and led expeditions from 1998 to 2014 to Laetoli, one of the most important early hominin sites, and is actually the reason why I went to work with him. So sorry, Terry, it was not for your charisma. So throughout his long and incredibly productive career, Terry's research is defined only by the diversity of subjects he undertook. He published on Miocene hominoids, Pliocene hominins, primate functional morphology, bovids, gastropods, ostrich eggshells, paleoecology, taphonomy, orangutan conservation, as I just found out, to just name a few. And his knowledge of these topics are not shallow. I will never, ever know how he manages to read, remember, and synthesize everything. These wide and varied subjects are connected by his holistic approach to understanding the past and his belief that environmental context is key to understanding primate and hominin evolution. And I will say as his former student that this has had a profound impact on how I approach human evolution and the context in which we evolved. And this holistic perspective has only made me and all the other scholars who have come into Terry's orbit better scientists and scholars. And even though Terry's now retired, and I will put that in quotes, he is still actively and productively contributing to the fields of paleoanthropology and paleontology. As an example, since his retirement in 2022, he has published 16 papers. How many of us are that productive, I would like to ask? And I believe he just told me today that he has a queue of research projects a mile long that he is determined to finish during his retirement. And the Gallagher paper is next. Gallagher paper is next. You have witnesses here now, Johannes. More than the research, Terry's also a phenomenal teacher and communicator because of his love for the science. I will never forget one of the student reviews that he had. Professor Harrison loves his monkey and made me love them too. what better review can you get from a student? And tonight he's going to share with us his perspectives on the paleoecology and behavior of Australopithecus afarensis, a species that all of you will be familiar with as the species that the famous Lucy, Dawn, belongs to. So without further ado, please welcome Professor Terry Harrison to the podium.
Thank you, Denise, for that very nice introduction. It's a very generous introduction. And thank you also, Johannes Haile Selassie, for inviting me to come and give this lecture. It's such a privilege and an honor to give the third Bill Kimbel Impact Lecture. I knew Bill well, and I'll talk a little moment about him in the next slide. But it's just so nice to see so many people interested in human origins. And so I hope I won't disappoint with a nice introduction. So Bill Kimbel remembered. This is the first time I met Bill. The screen on the right-hand side, that is Bill Kimbel in the background there. It's me, the skinny kid in the front row there, and my wife in the middle. Not the monkey, by the way. And we've got two very inquisitive monkeys taking an interest in us. And this is in Nairobi National City Park. And Bill was doing his PhD at that time, and I was doing my PhD at that time. And we really became firm friends. This was in 1980. And I've put that picture there because I like to see Bill as he was in his natural habitat there, working on craniodental material. Bill was a brilliant scientist. He was also an inspiring role model. He was a really generous colleague, and he was a dear friend. So this has been a great privilege for me to come and remember Bill. So I'm going to talk about something that I think may be an interesting topic for a number of people. It's a bit of a bold move for me. You can see on the left-hand side there, see if I got the cursor working. Oh, sorry. That's the image of Lucy that was there on the cover of the 50th anniversary of the discovery of Lucy that was recently in Science in 2024. We've got Don Johansson here, who of course has been instrumental in finding out so much about Australopithecus afarensis, Lucy being a member of Australopithecus afarensis, and this is a reconstruction. But what I wanted to do today was talk about early hominins, and we know a lot about early hominins, the great work that Don and various other people in this room have done to reconstruct what Lucy and her kind may have done in their lives. But also we've got some really great people here, Kay Reid is being one of them, and Denise, who work on the paleoecology. And so there are two aspects of human evolutionary studies that have been done, the kind of functional morphology studies and the paleoecological studies. And one of the things that we have a hard time doing is placing that human ancestor in the paleoecology. And I want to do that today, and there's a reason it's quite difficult to do. Few people have attempted it. Some people have done it. I'll try it today, but I think you can see from the quizzical look on Lucy's face that she doesn't believe I'm going to be able to pull this off either. So we'll see, we'll see. Yeah, what I want to do then is give you a kind of a sense of what life might have been like. I'm going to focus my attention on the site I've worked at, Laetoli, but we know so much about Australopithecus afarensis from the famous site of Hadar that, of course, I'm going to have to rely on evidence as well from Hadar, and I'm going to combine some of that evidence. But I wanted to give you a bit of a sense of my work at Laetoli, and the Laetoli is the site where we find afarensis as well as at Hadar. So this is the sites that we have. All of the red dots represent sites where we've recovered the remains of Australopithecus afarensis. Australopithecus afarensis is actually one of the best known early hominins that we have. It's known, it was a time period for about 1 million years, it lived for about 1 million years, and is known from about a dozen sites or so. You can see though that they're strung along, mostly along the Eastern Rift Valley, right down here, and there's one site in north central Africa, in Chad, that may belong to the same species. Notice one thing about this chart though. Hadar is up there in Ethiopia, up here in the north, and Laetoli, way down here, is the southernmost site with Australopithecus afarensis. And that distance between them is about 1,500 kilometers, about 1,000 miles. So there's a big distribution difference. And there is a big contrast between what we see at Hadar and what we see at Laetoli. So Laetoli is the southernmost site we have of Australopithecus afarensis. So a little bit of background first about Laetoli, and then I'll get into the whole combining that hominin and putting it in the landscape. So Laetoli is located in the southern Serengeti. One of the reasons that I like to work there is you're surrounded by the wildlife of the Serengeti. You just have to throw open the door of your tent and look out, and you see giraffe and zebra and lions and all sorts of wildlife. And it makes me imagine what it might have been like during Pliocene times when Australopithecus afarensis was alive. It's very close, as you can see, just to the north of it at Olduvai Gorge, which is about 30 kilometres away, 20 miles away. And you could walk it in a day. It actually took Lewis Leakey 3 days to drive from Olduvai to Laetoli. No one knew the shortcut. But the other important thing I wanted to mention here is the volcanic highlands to the east of Laetoli. And those really are the dominant sources of sediment that are deposited at Laetoli. It's volcanic ashes primarily. And most of those letters that you see there represent volcanoes, old volcanoes, many of them extinct. The N represents the Ngorongoro crater, that big crater that you see there, marked as N. Now, that is a collapsed volcano, a caldera, and that's relatively young. And many of you may have visited. If you've been on safari to Tanzania, you'll have, I'm sure, been in the northern tourist circuit where you'll have seen the Ngorongoro crater. The volcano that produced the sediment that was laid down at Laetoli was the oldest of those, the one marked with S, which is called Satimen, which is the oldest volcanic cone there. It's extinct now. In fact, it's buried under most of the other volcanic peaks. But that was producing lots of ash that was blown from prevailing winds from the Indian Ocean, blew it over to Laetoli and deposited it on Laetoli. Lake Eyasi is a relatively recent lake. It wasn't there during the time of afarensis, so there wasn't a lake there. That's a fairly recent lake formation at about 1.5 million years ago. So this is what Laetoli looks like with the ashes. You can see, I think, I'll try and highlight some of this for you. This is me, but, oh, sorry, it does it with the cursor. There's me in the background, hobbling around looking for fossils. And the hard layers that you see here are volcanic ash falls. So periodically, Laetoli was covered with volcanic ash layers. And most of the soft tissues that you see, or soft layers that you see below that, are reworked volcanic ashes that have been washed around by water and wind. It's all coming from this volcanic center called Satimen. Now, one of the interesting things about Satimen is it's a carbonatite volcano. It's a volcano that produces an unusual volcanic ash that's very rich in carbonates. And there is an active volcano towards the north of Laetoli called Oldonyo Lengai. Oldonyo Lengai in Ma, the language of the Maasai people, means mountain of the gods. And you can see there that it's often rumbling and producing volcanic spews. And so we've got that volcano, which is a carbonatite volcano. It can produce a good model of what conditions may have been like 3.5 to 4 million years ago at Laetoli. And I'll come back to Oldonyo Lengai in a moment. So this is what the landscape looks like today. And you can see in the middle here, I think you can make it out, some blue tents and tarpaulins. That's my base camp. And this looks, if you've ever been to Hadar or seen pictures from Don of Hadar, it does not look like this. It's wonderfully badlands areas, perfect, a paleontologist's dream, Hadar is. Laetoli, on the other hand, is covered in vegetation, not the kind of place that you really... The first time I drove up there, I couldn't believe it was a paleontological site. People had worked at the site before me, Mary Leakey particularly, and a German explorer before that. But I was actually staggered that you were going to find fossils in here, but there are small exposures. There's a little grey zone right here. That's one of the localities right there where the camp is, and one over the back there, locality 16. And those are small exposures that have yielded fossil hominins. So it's an unusual landscape, but I wanted to highlight what the landscape is like there today. You can see it's a very scrubby kind of vegetation, open woodland, bushland, lots of grassland, but we know in the past it wasn't like that. It was much more vegetated with rich kind of dense woodlands, grassland, and much more vegetated. It was much wetter in the Pliocene, the period we're talking about, and it was actually much warmer as well. So we know that conditions were much more ideal for more productive vegetation. The other thing, of course, is that this has been anthropogenically altered. Humans have lived here for a very long time, and they've chopped down the trees, and there's a lot of livestock that comes charging through here seasonally and lives there full time. So humans have impacted this ecosystem. So I think it would have looked a bit more like this, a more vegetated environment. The thing is that we don't really have a very good analogue for the ecosystem that we would reconstruct for Laetoli. It seems to be not a very good match for any modern day African ecosystem. It's a woodland, but it has features of that woodland that seem to be much higher in productivity than we see in woodlands today. The other feature I wanted to highlight here is that you see these elephants romping around in the shallow river in the foreground. That did not occur at Laetoli. Only for a very short window of time was there standing water at Laetoli. After the rainy season, there was water on the ground for a very short period of time. After that, it was probably dry for 7 or 8 months. The only way you could get it soon after the rainy season would have been to dig down into the riverbeds and maybe extract some water that way. But it was a very dry environment with no standing water. And one of the odd things about Laetoli's fauna, the animals that lived alongside Australopithecus afarensis, is that we have no hippos there, no crocodiles, no fish, no turtles. These are things that every paleontologist finds at other sites in East Africa. Laetoli is very unusual. It doesn't have animals that were aquatically adapted at all. So we can be pretty sure that it was a dry environment for much of the year. It would have had standing water for short periods. There's one other aspect of the Laetoli fauna that's unique, and this comes to the point that I've just made. There are 87 mammal species known from Laetoli in the fossil record. And you can see that there's 85 species are shown in grey on the left-hand side, but 2 species make up almost half of all the specimens found at Laetoli. One of them is the dik-dik, Medoque is its Latin name, and it's a species very close to the modern-day dik-dik that is common in East Africa. Almost over a third of the mammals collected are Serengeti lagers. My students always get upset because they're always finding Serengeti lagers and get sick about cataloguing Serengeti lagers again. And that's a hare. And these are 2 animals that are incredibly common at Laetoli, but you find very rarely at any other East African paleontological site. And the reason that they seem to be very common is that both of these can live in an ecosystem without standing water. They don't need to drink on a daily basis. They can go long periods and they extract the water from the vegetation that they eat. So that's a clue right there from the fauna that we're talking about an ecosystem that didn't have water. Now, of course, this has important implications for the hominins that were living there. To be dry for 7 months of the year and to live in an ecosystem where resources would have actually been constrained in terms of dietary resources during parts of the year. So let's talk about what we do know about how Australopithecus afarensis looked. This is the famous Lucy skeleton, and as I just mentioned, 50 years old. And from that skeletal material, Lucy's on the left-hand side, this is a reconstruction on the right-hand side. From those skeletal remains, we can make some really good inferences about how Lucy moved around its environment. Don, many years ago, observed very quickly that he had, as soon as he made some initial discoveries, that Lucy and her kind were terrestrial bipeds. It was a remarkable observation very early on. And more people have done studies since that time and have shown quite clearly that the hip bones and the hind limb and the feet of Australopithecus afarensis tell us quite clearly that it was a striding biped moving in a similar fashion to modern humans, how we move around. And the reconstruction I've got over there shows that it has relatively short legs, but the hips and hind limbs and feet are designed for terrestrial bipedalism. However, we do know from looking at the forelimb, the scapula, the shoulder blades, and aspects of the thorax, that there are aspects of Lucy that seem to be adaptations for arboreality too, so living in the trees. Now, people have argued that that may be just a primitive holdover and wasn't really part of the locomotor package, and terrestrial locomotion was preeminent. I would argue that those adaptations were critical for the adaptation of Australopithecus afarensis on the landscape at both Hadar and Laetoli. We've got good evidence from Laetoli that they were bipeds, fossilized behavior in the form of footprints. And these were discoveries made by Mary Leakey and her team in the late 70s, early 80s, and two sets of prints, and several other prints have been more recently described, but Site G is the really famous one, and some of you may have already visited Laetoli and been to the site where these footprints are. And you can see in the left-hand panel, there are three sets of prints actually, a smaller set over here, left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right, and in just to the right of those are sort of squished prints, which are prints superimposed on another set of prints. So there were three individuals, one stepping inside the print of another individual. So what we've got here is a kind of fossilized behavior. We don't have to make inferences necessarily from the skeletal remains, the functional morphology of the skeletal remains. That was very clear from the skeletal remains. But this confirmed in the late 1970s, early 1980s, that an animal, a hominin, Australopithecus afarensis, strode across the Laetoli ash-covered surface and left behind a set of footprints of a bipedal creature. This is a nice reconstruction of the events that took place. I'm a bit skeptical of this though, because they seem to be sauntering along. One of them is actually looking at the painter as it strolls along behind. And you've got all these wonderful animals strolling around, an ostrich and some giraffes and elephants. It would not have looked like this. This was a major eruptive event. It laid down a thick layer of ash about a foot thick, about 30 centimetres thick. That is a catastrophic event. We know from Oldonyo Lengai, remember I mentioned that, we know from that what happens in those kind of events with a carbonatite eruptive event is it poisons the water supply. Cattle, the Maasai cattle, die very quickly within a few days. They shed their hair and become bald cattle. The Maasai quickly leave the area and try and avoid these eruptive events, even small eruptive events. And these have happened in historical times, so we've got good documentation for that. So I don't think this would have been a reasonable scenario. This looks like a stroll in the park. It actually would have been quite catastrophic. We know that in that ash layer are branches and leaves and fruits that have been ripped off every tree in sight. So you see those trees there with leaves on. That is not what it would have looked like. It would have actually been quite a barren environment during these eruptive events. But those eruptive events were quite short term, and other animals would have soon recovered and come back, and afarensis would. It's just this scenario is more troublesome. But it isn't just eruptive events we have to worry about. It's also carnivores that were really abundant on the landscape at Laetoli. And you've got, on the right-hand side, the breakdown of different kinds of carnivores in the modern-day Serengeti fauna. There are 28 carnivores. Now, most of those are quite small and wouldn't be troublesome for Australopithecus afarensis. Those are things like mongooses and civets and genets, small carnivores that we don't have to worry about. But you can see, and I've had quite a lot of experience of this, of running into hyenas and felids at Laetoli, where we encounter them on foot quite frequently, much to my fear and worrisome. So if you look at what the Laetoli fauna has, we have exactly the same number. 28 carnivores are known from Laetoli. But what you've got is hyenas and felids, the big cats and hyenas, there are 12 species of those, whereas in the modern day Serengeti system, there are only 9. So Laetoli would have been a very dangerous place for a small hominin that was only so big and would have been a delicious meal for many of these big carnivores. So I think it was actually a dangerous place, and there were ways that afarensis needed to adopt strategies to avoid predators, because there are many ferocious predators. So for example, if you look at the mugshots of the contenders who were there at Laetoli, you've got lions, and this is going from left to right, lions, leopards, and 2 saber-toothed cats. And that's Dinophilis and Homotherium. The big guy on the right-hand side is a thing called Homotherium. That would have been a sort of a heavy lion-sized creature, and quite a ferocious creature. And then there's a whole row of hyenas as well that would have been a problem for afarensis on this landscape. So one way that primates, old world monkeys, great apes, avoid predators is to spend time in trees. They nest and roost at night in trees. You can often, there are many people here who study baboons, I think, and we know that baboons, you can see in the top left-hand corner, baboons returning to the trees at night to avoid predators. And it's not just that they have trees as a refuge. Old world monkeys have, and gibbons too, have an adaptation that will allow them to sleep in trees on very narrow diameter supports. And what you can see in the bottom left-hand corner are the rear end, obligingly, a rear end of a monkey. And what those white patches are what are called ischial callosities. They are roughened pads on the buttocks of the monkey, and they're attached by fibrous membranes to the bony tissue of the pelvis. And what they are frictioned sitting pads. And they allow monkeys to sit on very small diameter supports in trees and to sleep basically sitting up like you see those 2 monkeys in the pictures on the right-hand side. They're not sitting particularly on small diameter supports, but it does allow them at night to do so. And the fact that those monkeys have that posture where they've got a vertical back, the legs splayed out in front, and ischial callosities to make it possible for them to sit on small diameter supports, that is a typical old world monkey ape posture in an arboreal setting. You guys are epitomizing that now. You are sitting in this position that is our evolutionary history, basically. And so those ischial callosities are not found in great apes and humans. We sometimes see the vestiges of those sitting pads, but what really happens is you only have this as a good strategy to avoid predators if you can sit on a terminal branch, one that's very small, so that if any predator approaches you in the night, then it gives an early warning system. And you often hear baboons at night calling out and screaming that there's a predator in the tree. But what great apes have done, they are too big for this strategy to work. They don't need sitting pads. What they've done is developed an interesting strategy of building nests, which is basically a way of distributing your weight over lots of terminal branches. If you're big, you have to sit on a very big branch, or what you can do is build a nest on lots of terminal branches. So that's a long way of explanation, but you'll see that I think that there's good reason why Australopithecus afarensis would have utilised arboreal resources. You can see here, Australopithecus afarensis is trying to avoid a saber-toothed cat, Homotherium. And actually, my money's on Homotherium in this picture, actually. I think there's a good chance Homotherium's going to win out. And, you know, it's a big, ferocious cat. And if you're not quick at getting up the tree, then you are going to be caught. But on the right-hand side, you can see you've got afarensis climbing up a tree. You've got afarensis foraging in trees, because that's the other great thing about trees is not only have you got to forage on the ground, but you're opening up a whole universe of dietary resources once you can get into the trees. And hominins and other primates have a real advantage in that. They don't have to wait for fruits to fall to the ground. They can forage up in the trees. And then building nests. I think all of these things were important adaptive strategies for Australopithecus afarensis. Humans are actually quite good at climbing in trees, as you can see on the left-hand side. Humans around the world actually can climb trees. We're not as good as chimpanzees at climbing, there's no question. We've got odd feet. We've got the oddest feet of any primate. But humans actually are quite good at it. Most of us. Actually, I fell out of a tree 2 years ago, but thanks to the miracle of staples and super glue, I've actually survived. I can be here today to enjoy this lecture with you. And for some bizarre reason, this skeleton is walking through the woods, but ignore that. What we can see here is that the human skeleton is actually well adapted for climbing in trees. The forelimb, the scapula, the thorax are holdovers from our arboreal heritage. The fact that I can raise my arm above my head like this is a characteristic of great apes and humans. Most other primates can't do that. That's a part of our heritage of the time that we've spent in trees, and we retain that. So we are actually quite adept at climbing in trees, but you usually have to be more experienced than me. The thing about the last picture there is anyone who's traveled on the New York subway will know that it is exquisitely designed for suspensory primates. If it was designed by baboons, it wouldn't look like that, okay? You wouldn't be able to hang by your hands. There would be no such thing as a baboon strap hanger, all right? So you only can do it if you're a suspensory primate, and humans are. So I would argue that humans are pretty good at climbing trees. Chimpanzees are excellent at climbing trees. And I would argue that afarensis, Australopithecus afarensis, was probably a pretty adept tree climber too. Now, I won't dwell on this slide because it's a bit of a complicated slide, so I won't get too much into this. But we also can tell things about the diet of Australopithecus afarensis. There's dental microwear. These are microscopic wear facets or wear features on the molars and teeth of primates. And over on this side, these are all modern primates at the top panel here. These over here are monkeys that eat leaves and have lots of what we call scratches on the molars. And over here are monkeys that eat seeds and hard fruits, and they have lots of pits on there. So small pits versus fine scratches. And for some reason, it's interesting that afarensis, which is superimposed here in this kind of purpley colour here, fits really quite nicely with gorillas and overlaps with chimpanzees. I don't think you can read it actually on the screen very readily. But so what it tells you is that really the dietary behaviour, according to the microwear data, looks like Australopithecus afarensis is adapted for eating young leaves and relatively soft fruits, rather than tough, fibrous foods like leaves or hard seeds, which is a bit odd because actually the facial morphology of afarensis and the thick enamel on the big molars would suggest that they were eating quite hard objects. On the other side of that chart is the carbon isotope data. It's a simple chart in some ways. What these are, the little points that run up on the right-hand side, are individual specimens from Hadar that have had their carbon isotope taken. And some of the individuals were eating products produced by forbs, shrubs, and trees. Some at the top of that panel were eating foods that were dominated by grasses or sedges, and in between, individuals who were eating a mix of different things. Now, that doesn't fit very well with the microwear data, which suggested that they wouldn't be eating things like grasses, but yet a significant portion of the diet of Australopithecus afarensis at Hadar was grass products of some kind, or C4 plants. Now, there are a few other C4 plants that they could have been exploiting, or they could have been eating animals that were eating C4 plants. That would give you the same isotopic signature, or a similar isotopic signature. So it's a bit of a conundrum here, because we've got this really good evidence that's used to really reconstruct the dietary behavior of many fossil mammals, but it doesn't work very well for these early hominins. It doesn't really fit very well, and the two lines of evidence are difficult to explain. So I think I'll leave it there because I don't want to go sort of get into the weeds of all of this. There is one other possibility, actually, that they were eating termites. Termites are eating a lot of grasses, and if you consume a lot of termites, then you can, of course, build up your C4 signature, which is the grassy end of the spectrum. You'd have to eat a lot of termites, but we know from the fossil record at Laetoli there were huge termite mounds there with macrotermes, the really big termite, that actually was consuming lots of grasses at Laetoli. So that could account for it. And then the other thing, of course, is that we know that certain euphorbs, like the really famous candelabra euphorbia that's classic for East Africa, the fruits of that are also C4 fruits. So what else could be on the menu here? That's kind of like giving us a sort of enigmatic data. Now, we do know from a number of sites, especially at Dakika, on the left-hand side, you've got some cut-marked bone. These are large mammal bones that have had cut marks on them, and you can see sort of a blow-up of some of those cut marks in the bottom panel. And then on the right-hand side, you've got some of the earliest stone tools. These are dated to 3.4 and 3.3 million years. It suggests the origins of large mammal butchery using stone tool technology. But this is much younger than anything we've got at Laetoli. Laetoli is older than this. Laetoli is 3.65 to 3.8 million years. It's much older than this. And we've looked very closely at the thousands and tens of thousands of fossils that we have from Laetoli. There is no evidence of either cut marks on the bone or of stone tools in the sediments. So I would argue that at Laetoli, at least, there is no evidence for this kind of behaviour that appears in the fossil record sporadically by 3.3 and 3.4 million years ago. So what might have been on the menu? Small vertebrate prey, possibly. We can rule out large mammals, so they weren't hunting or doing anything with large mammals. And some of these animals that are present at Laetoli, I don't know if you can quite make it out, but under that rock on the top left-hand side is a small tortoise. There are lots of tortoises at Laetoli. We've got them in the fossil record, and they occur there today. Young tortoises, like you see there, are cryptic. They tend to hide out. Once they get big enough where they can avoid really big predators, they can move around much more adeptly. But when they're tiny, they really have to hide out because they are prey to a large number of predators, including large birds as well as lots of mammals. But that could have been something on the menu of an ingenious early hominin like Australopithecus afarensis. Tortoises, and I think chimpanzees are eating tortoises too. Lizards and chameleons that you can see on the right-hand side and the top right-hand side, I think that those could have also been. So small reptiles, I think, could have well been a prey species. Some of the species at the lower end are things that chimpanzees will eat, rodents and rabbits and small antelopes, and a preferred item is monkeys. I'm not sure that afarensis, which would have been bipedal, but quite slow compared to chimpanzees. Chimpanzees are exceedingly fast and exceedingly powerful primates. And I think that they would have had a hard time catching dik-diks. The dik-dik is the one in the middle there, or killing monkeys, chasing them up into trees and killing them. That would have actually been pretty challenging. So even some of these small vertebrate prey would have actually been quite challenging for Australopithecus afarensis to catch. But they could have been important sources of protein. Another possibility is birds' eggs. There are lots of birds that lay their eggs on the ground in the Serengeti. It's actually surprising. As I mentioned to you, there are so many small carnivores roaming around at night and during the day. I'm not quite sure how I understand the strategy of laying your eggs on the ground in just a shallow dirt scrape. It seems to be counterproductive, really. But lots of them do it. So, for example, you've got there guinea fowl on the bottom left-hand side. On the right-hand side are actually spotted eagle owl eggs, and in the middle is a sand. I've forgotten what it is now, actually, but it's a small sand grouse. That's the word, sand grouse. So those are all different primates. All different birds that lay their eggs on the ground. Those would have easily been able to forage and provide an important source of protein. Fortunately for us, we've actually got fossil eggs in nests at Laetoli. So the ones in the top left-hand panels, those two in the top left-hand panels, those are 3.5 million year to 4 million year old eggs that were laid in nests. I can't even get them back from the supermarket looking that good. They are a bit cracked, but, they are remarkable to show that guinea fowl eggs and spur fowl eggs, the two pictures that you see there, were around and quite common at Laetoli and would have been an important protein source. Another source might be insects. We've got, and many of you, if you've ever traveled to Central Africa or South Africa, you'll know that an important source of food is our friend the mopane worm. And it's actually those big caterpillars in the middle. They're beautifully coloured, and they can strip trees. They occur in trees, and there are thousands of them that strip trees. And they're nice and big and full of fat and proteins, and they're delicious. And people in Central Africa and Southern Africa can them. And I don't know if you can read it, actually. It says they're salted and delicious, and they are. And that's what the moth looks like, and these are the caterpillars from the moth. It just so happens that the top left-hand picture is a chrysalis of a mopane worm from Laetoli. We know there were mopane worms there. It's quite remarkable getting a chrysalis, because what happens is when the caterpillars are ready to pupate, they fall to the ground and bury themselves in the sediment, and that's what we've got at Laetoli in the fossil record. And next to it is a living example, a live example. But we've also got dung beetles, and on the right-hand side is actually, that's a fossilized dung beetle in the middle there, and on the right-hand side is fossilized dung that's been rolled up, and those have these incredibly juicy grubs inside of them. They usually bury them quite deep, so they would be pretty hard for afarensis to get to, I think. They'd probably half a metre down, so they'd be quite down there. But they are wonderfully delicious. The best animals that get to them are bat-eared foxes, because they can kind of hear the little grub inside about half a metre down, roaming around and eating away, munching on the dung, and basically they dig them up and they're delicious. So there are plenty of insects. Termites, of course, which were ubiquitous at Laetoli in the Pliocene, would have been another big important source. As we know, it's a favourite food item for chimpanzees. And honey is another resource. It's a very popular source of food for local people in the area today who put out handmade nesting materials for bees, hives for bees, and attract bees and then harvest the honey. I think honey, although it can be dangerous, usually, I encounter lots of wild animals on my trips. The one I usually am most scared about actually are swarms of bees that are looking for nests, because when they fly over, it's like an express train going over your head, and you're really scared, because if they settle on you, which is what happened to Louis Leakey actually, he really got badly stung in his later life by bees that landed on his head and stung him hundreds of times. But we also have, and this is coming to a close now, we also have fossil seeds and fruits from Laetoli. The top series of panels are the fossils from the fossil record. And below that, in colour below, are the examples of modern-day fruits that match those that we've been able to identify. We've got about 20 different kinds of fruits. Now, the interesting thing about that is that we can't see today all of those fruits in the woodlands of Laetoli today. This is clearly a woodland that doesn't match Laetoli today. It's a woodland that's much richer and has a higher productivity. But there would have been fruits seasonally available for Australopithecus afarensis. And these would have been really important, but there was only a limited season in which ripe fruits, or unripe fruits even, were available. And after that, they would have had to rely on plant materials that we might call fallback foods, which are less preferred foods, but are available on the seasons when it was dry. And we already know, as I mentioned before, there was a long dry season when they would have had to forage for these fallback foods, but those would have been critical for Australopithecus afarensis. So this comes us back to basically, what was life like for Australopithecus afarensis? Hopefully I've given you a bit of an insight into some of the things that I've been thinking about. Some of it is based on evidence that we've got. Some of it is speculative. I don't know that they nested in trees. There's no, archaeological or paleontological evidence for that. It just makes logical sense from what we know about the evolutionary history of great apes and humans. So let me just wrap up what I think are the take-home points. So there was, this is really about Laetoli and afarensis. Highly seasonal water availability, and it would have impacted how hominids foraged, their carrying capacity, and the dietary resources available to them. It was actually quite a challenging environment. The clue here is, though, that we don't really have a very good idea what kind of dietary behaviour Australopithecus afarensis had at Laetoli, or at Hadar for that matter. It's difficult to assess what was really available to them and what they were actually eating. We know that Australopithecus afarensis was a terrestrial biped, but I think it retained the ability to exploit resources in trees, and certainly would have used trees for sleeping sites at night. Otherwise, predators would have actually been too problematic. They would have then had to develop other strategies for predator avoidance, and these would have been critical adaptations. Nesting in trees at night would have been one of them. Now, there's also the possibility that having a strange biped walk in front of you may have actually been disturbing. Many carnivores have particular search images. Lions prefer particular prey animals that they have search images for. Having a weird animal walk across you bipedally may actually disturb your search image, and you may actually get some selective advantage about being a strange primate walking bipedally, and therefore it may have been a deterrent to some of these carnivores. I suspect a limited deterrent, but possibly. There's no evidence of stone tool use at Laetoli or large mammal butchery. They weren't exploiting large mammals as a source of food. Insects, eggs, and small vertebrates may have been exploited. I think they were. They were readily available, and that would have been an important source of protein. So, and of course, seeds and fruits is the last point I made. Seeds and fruits were seasonally available, but fallback foods, these non-preferred food items that would have been available for more than half of the season's year, would have been of critical importance for the dietary behaviour. So I can't really give you a really clear image of what life was like at Laetoli back in the Pliocene at 3.65 million years ago. But hopefully I've given you a little bit of a sampling of what we might be able to deduce from the evidence that we've got available. So thank you very much.